had a lens on underserved communities. And in recent weeks, we've been able to be very intentional in regards to that and speak about clearly Black and brown people, okay, as opposed to trying to couch it in some other way. And with that, I don't know whether or not you've heard, but he's implemented Executive Directive 27, which in essence is driving towards racial equity in all of city government. Now, it's fantastic, which is he's assigned Capri Maddox as the first Chief Diversity Officer of Civil and Human Rights, I believe, in the city, looking at all of the different aspects in which equity or inequities show their face throughout the hiring process and things of that sort. Things, even some unconscious things that aren't really, taken into account. And this is within a city government that already is pretty diverse. I come from the private sector. I spent almost all of my time, my career in the private sector. And this is by far the most diverse set of people that I've ever worked with, ever. It was really weird in my first cabinet meeting. But all that being said, the city only employs a certain percentage. 85% of the workforce is still employed by the private sector. So what we're trying to do, what I'm doing expressly, is trying to reach out to the private sector to get them to buy into the same principles of ED 27 and try to improve racial equity and parity throughout different processes in the private sector. When we can speak more on that as time goes on of what that looks like, but it's the second largest city in the world, the third largest metropolitan economy in the world. And so we have our work in front of us, but we're up for it.
Excellent. Thank you for that, Ron. This question is directed to Brad in the same context. What HR policies are currently in place within your organization to promote diversity and inclusion?
That's a great question, Samuel. And I will start off by saying Abbott is a very, shall we say, traditional medical device organization, 110 years of history in business. And for those of you that are in sales within the organization, you understand that translates into there's a very homogeneous tint to our leadership, our sales force. There's very little diversity within at least my division of Abbott. With the recent social events that have come to pass in recent months, we have finally, which I'm almost embarrassed to say, finally hired a chief diversity officer who is someone of color, which is good. Our diversity and inclusion department prior to was not consistent of anyone of color, either male or female, which is a very interesting way to have a diversity inclusion program. Several of the organizations that I think when you start looking at it, they tend to include diversity inclusion and include multiple ethnicities, diversities, and they tend to exclude Black and brown people when it pertains to diversity inclusion. So with that in mind, we finally hired a diversity inclusion officer. We've had several conversations with our new CEO around what diversity looks like at Abbott and what we need to do to expand and get better, quite frankly. There has been a recognized bias on his part that currently Black and brown people do not have mentors, they do not have sponsors, they do not have people that are at the table that are in positions to elevate the conversation. So what we're really looking to do now is, and myself as I'm one of an N of one, unfortunately at that table, I've been charged with trying to look to different ways to go about recruiting, go about retention, and more importantly, once we get people in the organization, how do we mentor and sponsor them to new opportunities? So new programs, we're working to develop new things, but at least the conversation has begun, so that's positive.
Brad, thank you for that transparency. That's sincerely appreciated. Those are the things we definitely want to hear, and we really appreciate that. So in that same vein, I'll start with you, Cheryl. You've heard from Ron, you've heard from Brad. What should companies and cities consider when creating policies for promotion of diversity and inclusion based on your experience?
Well, I think it needs to be something that is easily attainable, right? It's
Mm-hmm.
interesting because today I had a conversation with LAPD Chief Michael Moore about some of these issues surrounding recruit candidates for the Los Angeles Police Department, and
Mm-hmm.
why is it that not only LAPD but around the 18,000 departments, there seems to be not many folks who look like me. And
Right.
more importantly, I think at least what I'm hearing from folks who do reach out to me, that the feeling is that obstacles are put in our way. And I don't know if they're real obstacles or just perceived obstacles to prevent us from either attaining employment or moving up the ladder once you do get on a department or with an organization. And so I think it's important to make sure that there are programs like the mentoring program that was mentioned, that there are real and fair processes in terms of questioning and background checks and that kind of stuff, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, One of the things that I say that I hear from folks is, you know, when you look like me and you particularly try to get in law enforcement, and so that's what I know, so that's what I have to speak to is, you know, we're often asked how many bubbles are in a bar of soap, and not so much, you know, for the other candidates. And so I think there needs to be a concerted effort and there needs to be oversight to make sure that it's a fair and equal ground playing field for folks who look to get on whatever the occupation is.
Definitely. Definitely. Thank you for that. Stacy, how about your thoughts?
So I think that the first question that I always ask when I'm dealing with corporations is, what is the goal? Because so many times they're asking me to help them with the pieces, right? And the process, but I'm like, to what end? Mm-hmm. And if I don't know what the goal is, then anything that I'm doing is really not going to help further the direction, right? If we don't know the destination, we can wander all day, but we're not actually going to get anywhere. I mean, we'll end up somewhere, but is that the place you wanted to go? Right. You won't know because you didn't have a destination. So it's the main piece is, what's the goal? And that really is a very hard thing for companies to wrap their head around, because they're like, well, I don't know, what should the goal be? Mm-hmm. And mm-hmm. So that's where it's really important for companies to ask their employees and talk to them. And I think that's what makes the concept of diversity and inclusion seems so difficult and for people to wrap their arms around, because they're looking for one solution. They want the pill that they can take that is going to fix everything. And there's a pill, but every company has a different pill. So you got to open up a pill bottle and figure out which pill is yours. Mm-hmm. And I think that's really the hard part. And so, especially when you're looking at, I tell them, well, look at the demographics of your customer base, mm-hmm. your community, and look to see then, is that reflective in your workplace? Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And many times it's not. I'm like, well, that's a goal you could start with, right? But is it the goal, right? Yeah. So there's many different types of goals. It just depends. Are you an innovative company that wants to move quickly? Are you trying to, make changes in a large corporate organization like Abbott, for example, where it's going to take longer? You've got more layers to go through. Sure. Your strategy is going to be far different than a tech startup out of San Francisco. Right. And so that's the thing that you have to look at is, who are you? Where are you going? What's the goal?
Got it. Thank you for that. Bringing it back to the employees. Great. That's great. One thing I want to mention, if I didn't say it earlier, for everyone listening that has questions, especially for a specific individual, please type it in the chat. At the end of our discussion, we're going to have a question and answer session, but it's going to be chat based. So if you're having questions, if you're listening to these responses and things are coming up in your mind, please type them in the chat. Okay, let's continue with the next question. And then thank you all for your responses. This one's going back to Ron. Ron, are you able to provide quantitative measures like the rates of retention and attrition within the public sector after diversity and inclusion policies have been in place?
I couldn't spot out any statistics to you right now, but something that I'm sure we all will understand, especially when it comes to the public sector versus the private sector. Traditionally, government has always been a little more diverse than the private sector. And that's been part of the issue. And even me coming from Michigan, I remember, you know, my grandmother saying something about having a good government job, or in my case, working for General Motors or something, working in the plant back at home in Michigan in those auto towns. But essentially, I think for the most part, that stereotype is true. Traditionally, public sector is a little more diverse than private sector. It just so happens that my responsibility is the private sector. So what I'm doing, what I'm solely focused on, is in helping those 85% of the private sector workforce for them to improve their level of diversity. If the private sector was reflective of the public sector in regards to racial equity and the makeup, now, if you look at a lot of the people that work in the government that you may or may not know, you see quite a few, you know, black and brown faces, but you don't see as many of those working in Beverly Hills or in downtown in the high rise unless there's security or something like that. So what I want is that I want for that to be replicated in the private sector. So that's what I'm solely focused on, and how can we as public sector officials effectuate that, promote that, and encourage that. One of the things that I am, you know, personally doing, and my boss knows this, is that I want something that's sustainable and resilient that will last beyond his time in office. That's important. Programs, this and the other, they're great, but the next administration or the lack of funding or anything can happen, programs can be uplifted, not funded, not properly staffed. I want something that's resilient and sustainable, that's going to last as an institutional private sector ethos that is so baked into the system that we can effectuate real sustainable change that's going to be here long after we leave City Hall. Yeah. And so that's my goal. So it's more private sector focused than it is public sector, because for the most part, public sector, my deputy mayor is Asian. Mm-hmm. His director of economic policy is Black. Mm-hmm. My director of community business, which is small business, he's Black. Mm-hmm. We have 3 Black councilmen. We have a black deputy mayor, Brenda Shockley. We have Black XOs. We have a lot of Black people in leadership positions there at City Hall. I want the same thing in corporate America.
Excellent. Excellent. Thank you for that, Ron. So, you know, I'm going to take this back to Stacey, actually, because that's a great point, right on what Ron just said. Stacey, how do we hold our leaders accountable? No matter if they're in the public or private sector, and you can even speak to the private sector first, because that's what Ron just spoke on. How can we hold our leaders accountable for inclusive practices that actually do yield a meaningful impact and last?
Yes, you have to hold people accountable using measurable goals, metrics, which I think I heard Ron say, and you have to take action on that accountability, because sometimes companies will get half of it right. They'll say, yeah, we want metrics, we're going to make it measurable, we're going to write all of these things down. That's great. But then when Joe, who's the head of the department, isn't fulfilling those pieces, we don't discipline, because, well, Joe is doing really well in sales and we don't want to upset Joe, so we're not going to say anything. Well, what was the point of the metrics and the measurements and all the other stuff that you did if you're not actually going to hold him accountable to doing something about it? So it's really important. And I hear people say all the time, well, you know, we don't want to upset the apple cart, and we don't want to do this, we don't want to do that. It's like, you know what? If you had a safety issue in a warehouse and you had guidelines around that, you would make sure that everyone followed those guidelines, because it's a matter of safety. So it's the same thing. If you have a policy in place, you have to follow it, period. If you don't intend to actually speak to and act to what you have on paper, don't write it, don't say it, don't bother, right? Like, don't waste our time. And so I think that that's the really big piece, is getting people to realize that you have to be accountable for what you put down on paper. And that's really hard for leadership to do, because they have to be, you know, the quote unquote bad guy and say something about it. And I think the other piece is too, it's like we have this one bad apple phenomena in workplaces, right? We say, oh, Joe, he, harassed so-and-so, or he, made a derogatory remark towards Samuel. So we've let him go and we're all good now.
Mm.
No, you have a policy in place that allowed him to behave in this way.
Mm.
So you still have to look at your policies. You still have to look at your practices. You still have to look at your systems, because the system you have allowed people to behave in this way.
Got it. Thank you for that, Stacey. Cheryl, anything that you would add to how we can hold our leaders accountable?
Yeah, I think, in addition to what Stacey was just saying, is safe zones, right? I think it's important to have places where, when you do have those instances of an errant employee, that those who know about it can speak on it safely and not worry about retaliation, because while there's on paper, protections for whistleblowers and the like, in reality, there's a price to pay if you speak out. And I know this to be true because I did it on the LAPD. I went to the safe spot, and before I could get back to my division, they already knew.
Wow.
So I think it's important to create places, and when folks know that they have the support of those higher up, they may feel more comfortable coming forward. Why would you jeopardize your position, your career, your safety in terms of law enforcement if you know that you don't have the support of your command staff?
Got it. Make sure there's support. It's good. Okay, now we're gonna move to the next question. And this one's going back to Ron. So Ron, you talked about how you are working a lot in the private sector. So what's the city doing to welcome minority businesses? And then specifically, after you answer that, what's being done about supporting Black businesses?
Okay, we are living in an unprecedented time because of COVID-19. So what our focus has been on recently is trying to save business. Everyone's hurting right now. But what we've been trying to do with the limited pool of funds that we have is that we've been trying to pull through and trying to serve the most needy and most vulnerable businesses. And just by that nature of that sort of demographic, it happens to be more minority-owned business, just because they are already the most vulnerable, perhaps because of the sectors that we're in. We're primarily more service sector, more retail, which those sectors are hit harder than most. And also, if they're already coming from census tracts and underserved communities, they tend to be more vulnerable. So just by mere fact of geography and demographics, we've been trying to assist where we can. So me personally, I helped to structure a microloan program. This microloan program had limited funds. And I noticed that when I had one of the departments that reports to me, the mayor said, "We want to do this microloan." I said, "Yes, let's do that." So we structured it, had the department implement, but I noticed that the money wasn't funneling out as fast as we would like. Because with loans, it requires underwriting. And it also requires a bit of technical expertise. Now you think about it, some of the most at-risk businesses, they may know their specific business, but they may not have strong banking relationships. They may not have situations where they understand certain aspects of tech paperwork, because they may not have filled out a loan before. So there's a lot of technical assistance that's needed. And during COVID, where social distancing is the new norm and places are closed, how can you get that technical assistance out to the people that need it the most? So because of all these different things and the underwriting capacity component of it, just the money wasn't flowing fast enough. So instead of getting all the complaints of why isn't the money out there, why is it not, I said, let's turn it into a grant, okay? If you turn it into a grant, you can greatly reduce the underwriting requirements, and the throughput can be expedited. So there's still certain things we need to do to be sure we're not just throwing money to the wind. Right. But for the most part, we started that. And now we are also contributing over $10 million to a regional a regional grant that's in partnership with LA County and philanthropy, so we can reach that many more businesses that are out there.
Yeah.
And what we're doing again is that we are trying to identify the most vulnerable companies, the most vulnerable small businesses, and they are having a more favorable view when it comes to their applications, when it comes to in regards to this loan. So that's some of the things I'm doing. Another thing I've doing is that I was really, in the very beginning, I was really for the commercial eviction moratorium.
Mm-hmm.
Originally, the eviction moratorium was primarily for residential and for obvious reasons. We're already steeped with homelessness right now, which hurts all of us. And now you get to a point where you have this epidemic, you can't now have people being evicted from the home. So the residential side was easy. Had to take a little more coaxing for the commercial side. That commercial side is not without controversy, and I'm working on that right now because we wanted to help the most vulnerable companies again. The small stores, the small restaurants, those retail restaurants that don't get the flow of traffic in there because people just aren't buying, or because when they're safer at home, people just couldn't come to it. So coming to their stores. But what also happens, we put limitations, like if you have more than 500 employees, then you're not eligible. If you're a publicly traded company, then you're not eligible, because we wanted it to be for small business. Now, hindsight, Monday morning quarterback, you think about it, there are some family offices, some venture capital, some private equity firms that have under 500 employees, okay? But they can afford to pay rent, okay? So now we have to go back and take a look at that because, and I hate to go a little long, but this is important with this. The landlords right now, most people don't know this, but most of these buildings and all these commercial buildings, because things cost so much in LA, they don't own them free and clear. They have bank notes, they have mortgages, and they depend on that rent in order to pay their mortgage. Okay. Now, banking is a federal thing. It's not something we can control. So we can't make the banks at the federal level say, we're going to give you mortgage forbearance. So now what happens is this. What happens is that when you have those companies that can pay, especially those big companies like private equity firms and venture capitalists that can pay and they don't, then that has no money going to the system and through to the landlords, who can then in turn pay their employees they have on staff. That means the property managers. That means the the groundskeepers. That means the janitors. They can't pay them because they were paying them out of rents. Okay, so now it adds to the issue. So when it comes out, what I will hope is that everyone on this call can agree that we want the eviction moratorium for businesses, but for what it was meant, the spirit of it. The spirit of it is to help that corner store, to help that small business, to help that small entrepreneur. It's not to help some venture capitalist or some private equity firm that just happens to have under 500 employees. Okay. So, hate to go long, but that's important. But those are things that are going on. Okay.
No, I appreciate that. That's actually important. In fact, I did have one quick question about the grants you were talking about.
Yeah.
How is the city communicating these grants? How are they communicating the access to these grants?
It's all over the website and it's working well. And the first day of the regional grant, we had over 50,000 applications in the first day.
Okay.
And so the word is out there. Now, this is the key. These grants is not an unlimited and infinite source of funds. Like I said, there's a certain amount of funds that's set aside from COVID relief funds. There's a certain amount of funds that the county put in, city put in, and philanthropy. So from those three sources, we have a pool of funds and we have to divvy it out as much as we can. So if anyone on the call that's listening, if you guys are interested in applying for this grant, there's 6 rounds for the grant. And we're already into the second round. I believe the second round closes tomorrow. Okay. But there's 3 more rounds. The great thing about it is that if you don't get it on this round, you have an equal chance of getting it the next round. So if you're not chosen one round, it's not like you've thrown, you don't get preferential treatment for the round subsequent. But at the same time, you do get an equal evaluation again with everyone else in that round. But I would say go to LA Regional COVID Relief Fund. Just Google that and it'll take you to the right thing and just apply. Apply as soon as you can. Okay.
Excellent. Thank you for that, Ron. Okay, this is going to you, Brad. And I love how you were so transparent about what's actually happening in the company. And some things with Abbott is very new. But as companies, you have a social responsibility. And even though it's, every company is really embracing that right now, and it's different than governmental responsibilities, what new thing is your company doing to promote or work with minority business leaders?
Great question. And I will say that I'm proud of the company and proud of Abbott because they have a history of being very socially conscious. We do have a giving campaign every year where we have almost 100% participation from the field and from the in-house as well, from the corporation. There are several different not-for-profits that you can contribute to, and the company will match the funds from a contribution standpoint from employees. So that's something that we do annually throughout the year. Ironically enough, as once again, as things started to progress with things were happening in the country, our CEO, Robert Ford, made it a specific call out to select 12 different organizations that were basically directed towards minorities. I have them here: 100 Black Men, Center for Policing Equity, Embrace Race, Equal Justice Initiative, the Innocence Project, NAACP Foundation, NAACP Legal Defense and Education Fund, the National Urban League, Policy Link, Race Forward, and then the YMCA and YWCA. And the reason why that's important is because when you think about the makeup, once again, as you go back to my earlier comments around the makeup of our corporation and kind of the homogeneous segment as it pertains to diversity, yes, Abbott is a very giving company, but those individuals that are giving are usually not giving to diverse organizations. So for the CEO to call that out specifically and say that that's now a company initiative, that he's directing people to give to that, and they're actually doing a 2-to-1 match for those particular institutions, I think it's a very powerful statement from the office of the CEO. And I will also tell you that he is making his leadership team very uncomfortable, which is, it's a good thing. It's an opportunity for him to stretch them a little bit and make sure that they are recognizing and adhering to what he's trying to put forward from a corporate perspective. So as I said earlier, very early on in the process, and people are uncomfortable, which is a good thing. And it's not just the other, how should I say, our Caucasian counterparts. I mean, for some of our minority counterparts, it's uncomfortable for us as well. And one of the questions in the chat room, I'll just address this now, as we kind of talk about being the only Black person, we become the social activist voice. We become the person who has to give all the information around what the Black community wants or what diversity is like, right? Right. And I would tell you that as you have those conversations, it's important to have the conversations of diversity around what benefit that provides to the organization. The thing that people don't really understand, and I think Stacy alluded to it earlier, is that when our organization is representative of our customer base, of our communities at large. I live in Detroit or just outside Detroit. I can't have a very homogeneous Caucasian sales force in Detroit because it's a very, it's a mixed bag of people. Indian, Middle Eastern, obviously African American, Caucasian. And we need to have diversity in that so that not only we have people that look like our community and our patients and our customers, but also too that we understand the patients and what's needed from a customer's perspective. So as you have those conversations, it's really more so about bringing to light the advantages of what diversity brings to the table, and having voices at the table, once again, that can give perspective around what the benefit provided from a diverse standpoint, not only from color, but from sex, from diversity of thought, things of that nature that actually help us grow the organization.
Excellent. Thank you for that, Brad. So we know that, Brad, that was a great response. We really appreciate that. And your company's clearly starting to do things that are really going to make a difference. Ron also spoke to what's being done in the public sector regarding the grants. Stacy, is there anything that you would add to the conversation about how to even the playing field for minority businesses?
Well, but, it's an interesting question. I think to even the playing field, um, part of that is that there's such a it's such a deep question, right? Because I think about, and this might not seem relevant, but you'll see where I'm going with this. But I think about like the RFP process, for example, like for myself as an independent consultant with consultancy with others that work with me. We're small, right? And people are always saying to me, you should go through the RFP process. This would be really great for you. I'm sure it'd be wonderful. And I'm like, do you realize how lengthy the RFP process is? The amount of work I have to put into it. And I am assured that 99.9% of the time, I am not going to get anywhere with that. Why? Because the process is supposed to not have bias in it and supposed to be open to everyone. They have already identified who they want to work with. They already know who the players are. They've already called their people and said, hey, make sure you put your name on this so that you can get in there. And it just doesn't happen. So for small business owners, the bias is in so many layers to what you have to do, to how you get certified, to how you can respond to RFPs, to what you can charge. I actually had someone tell me one time that if I wanted to get ahead, I should have a white guy as the face of my company. And they weren't kidding. And they thought they were giving me really great advice. So I think that we have to look at, there's so many pieces. It's not just about business. It really is about how we interact with each other as people. Because if we fix that, then all the other pieces, how we interact in business, in life, in the retail store, when we go in and we talk to people, and in everything will get changed, right? But when we focus in on, well, what if we do this here in business? Or what if we do this here in corporate America? Or what if we do this here in church, right? People don't seem to take what they learn in that one place and apply it in other places. I don't know why. And it's the main reason that I tell companies when I go in, my job isn't to come in here and teach you how to talk to Black people. And then when a woman comes up to you, you're like, oh, I don't know what to do, right? Like the concepts have to be translatable across everything that we do. And that's the hard part.
Yeah, no, that's key. Cheryl, is there anything that you'd like to add? Any thoughts you'd like to add?
I just think it's important to make sure as you're looking for diversity that you also look to folks who can relate to you, can relate to, whatever your customer base is. And again, I'm speaking, in terms of law enforcement, right? Police. I think it's important to have folks who can relate, can understand, can be empathetic, can get you, right?
Right.
And so in so doing, I think that it's important to have an appetite to really go find those people because they're out there. Part of my angst is that I hear from police chiefs and others that they can't really find recruitable candidates, prospective law enforcement officers, if you will. And I know that they're out there. I encounter them, they find me. And so I don't often think that there's really an appetite in some instances for department heads to really look, right? They're there. It's easy to minimize and mitigate and excuse away. And so I think that mindset needs to change.
Got it. In the same vein, going back to Stacy now, what policies should we as individuals, the audience, advocate for in our own workplace to promote diversity and inclusion?
I think it goes back to what I said earlier around the action, right? We have to advocate for action. We have to advocate for consistent application of the policies. Okay. So I don't care what the policies are, but apply them consistently, right? Don't apply them differently for you than you do for me. And if you can apply those policies consistently, you can start to build trust within your organization. A lot of the reason that we don't, we find it so hard to work well with one another is that we don't have trust in our workplace. When I conduct, a workshop that people wanted to pre-COVID, when I was able to do them in person, the first thing that I would do is I would say, raise your hand if you know 90% of the people in the room. 3 people would raise their hand and they were probably in HR.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, you guys work on the same floor. You work in the same department and you don't know each other. So part of, the pushback I get is, well, it's not a company's job, right, to do all of these things. You're supposed to come to work and do your job. Well, that's not true anymore, right? This isn't, 1800s us being factory workers where you clocked in, you did a job all day, and then you clocked out. The work is different now. Work is social. Work is teams. And so we have to treat everything that we're doing in that same vein. We can't on the one hand say, oh, we don't have to deal with this, but on the other hand, we're kind of talking out of both sides of our mouth. And I think that when we look at how we treat people in the workforce, trust, civility, respect go a long way. And you can't have that when you don't know the people around you. You haven't had a real conversation with them. You don't know if they've got kids or what they're doing or what they're going through. And at the end of the day, when it's time to lay off someone or fire someone, who are you going to lay off or fire? The person you don't know, right? And the person that you don't know is usually the person who is different than you.
Got it. You know what? Real quick. Okay. I wasn't sure if Nikita wanted to speak up on something. But real quick, so Stacey, with that so what you're saying right now, is that something that the employees should figure out a way to do on their own, develop more trust amongst their coworkers, or is that something you're saying that the company heads should really enforce and push?
It's a bottom up, top down, right? I think bottom up, definitely employees, talk to your coworkers, ask them how they're doing, talk to somebody different. I used to say, think about who in your workplace, again, when you're in workplaces, but most people, some of us still are, but we would be in an environment where you would talk to the same 3 people all the time. If you got a piece of juicy gossip, who would you go tell it to, right? Pick somebody else, right? Ask somebody else to lunch. It's very simple to do those things and start to have these conversations. And it sounds so simplistic that people go, that's not going to work. Yeah, but have you tried it, right? And then from the top down, it's like, it's the leadership's job to lead, right? Leadership isn't a title, it's an action. So their job is to role model that behavior and create teams, help people to make sure that they are coexisting and have a good relationship with each other and deal with conflict management and, help teams to actually become teams. And if both parties are doing that, you're going to end up with an organization of people that actually start to feel like they belong.
Got it. Thank you for that, Stacey. This next question is actually for Brad. And Brad, you sort of answered this, but if there's any more you want to add to it, please feel free. So, just like you pointed out, we know that inaction or neutrality is a stance on its own. And it's a stance that companies are no longer taking because of what's happening with systemic change. I mean, it's everywhere, from the Black Lives Matter movement to just everyone noticing it everywhere we look, and it's a topic of conversation everywhere. What do you think we can expect from corporate America now in the future?
It's a great question. It's honestly, I think it's TBD, right? Everyone's going to put out their commercials now and Black Lives Matter now, and we've got these initiatives and all these things that are out there because it's the socially conscious thing to do. And you don't want to be left out on a limb not saying something, right? I mean, when you think about it, and I'll just go kind of to my scope of my industry, in the medical device industry, there were several companies that stepped out and made very strong statements right off the bat, right? I mean, after George Floyd's murder, there were several companies that stepped right out, made statements, and had their stance out there. And then there were others that it took time and they were more measured and they really kind of took a step back. And as you recall, or if you know, those companies were taken to task a little bit. Abbott being one of them, quite frankly. And Abbott being a global company, as most are, but they just don't participate usually in those types of messaging. We do a lot of business, for example, in China and Hong Kong. And earlier last year, when the issues with Hong Kong were happening, the company was silent. There was no statements around the social injustice that was going on in China, but it was almost spurred on, and it was spurred on mostly by the employees. I mean, I know there are a couple of folks on the line here today that work for Five as well, and we can all speak to the amount of emails and information that we pushed forward up to senior leadership to say, listen, we need to take a stance here. We need to know where the company stands on this. So back to your question, made the statement, have things put in place right now, but until there's true accountability from the top down, and then to take that a step further, as you think about it, there are several layers below the CEO, all the way down to the folks that really matter when it pertains to hiring, the regional sales managers. Those folks have to be held accountable. So there's got to be what I would like to call, you inspect what you expect, right? And there has to be inspection from people that actually matter, that actually sign paychecks, that actually, have performance reviews, the people that actually are responsible for the careers of the managers, to actually bring people into the organization. And once again, as I said earlier, not just mentor, but sponsor.
Sure.
Make sure that they're put in the appropriate situations to excel. Once those types of things happen, then we'll see what actually comes from this. But right now, to me, and I'm a very optimistic person at heart, but I'm also a realist. It's just window dressing at this point. It makes everybody look good in the press. Until we actually see real change, I'm kind of a wait and see kind of guy.
What do you think we can do to bring about actual change and really push these companies to continually do the things that they're looking like doing right now?
Perform. I mean, at the end of the day, especially when it pertains to sales, there's always a number, right? There's always a bottom line, and you have to perform. And when you perform, it gives you the ability to have a voice. The better you are at what you do, and the more you are aligned and you make yourself someone that is invaluable to customers and the people that you serve, the more power you have and the more ability you have to speak out. And obviously, we all have learned to speak out in the appropriate ways, in the appropriate fashion, the right place, right time, doing things in the appropriate manner. But as you perform and as you show what your true value is, that gives you the ability to be more assertive in what you want to see accomplished in your organization.
Thank you for that. Okay. So moving to the next question, this goes back to Cheryl. If we see inequality in the workplace, and you can even speak to the department as your experience shows us, if we see inequality in the workplace, how do you suggest we call attention to it? That's the first part of the question. Next part is, how do we prevent someone from being penalized for calling attention to it?
Well, I mean, you call attention to it by, not allowing it to happen in a vacuum, right? You speak on it. And I think that's why it's so important, for those who are willing to step out on a leap of faith, because that's what it takes, to not know whether you're going to have the support. And then if unfortunately you don't get the support that you need, or if you find yourself being retaliated against because of, then I say go outside. Because I think, most organizations are publicity averse. And, when folks find out that you're being treated in a way that's contradictory to policy procedure, sometimes that causes them to do things differently. And so, a closed mouth doesn't get fed, right? And so I think it's important to speak on it, because if you don't, then how does anyone know that that was even a problem to address, right? And if you understand, as you said earlier, that inaction is a stance, then what's the consequence, right? Mm-hmm. What's the consequence if you pretend to want something better and different, and that doesn't happen? Then what's the consequence? How do you deter those who aren't adhering?
Right. So when you say speak on it, are you saying just take it to your superior, or speak on it in a bigger fashion?
Well, I say, I say, tell Lottie Dottie and everybody. I mean, you want to follow policy and procedure, right? And certainly if there's a command structure, if there's a pecking order, if there's a process, you need to follow that process internally first. And if you don't get the resolve that you want there, then you go as high as you can go, and then you go out.
Okay. Thank you, Cheryl. Stacy, anything to add there?
I would say document, because that's one piece we sometimes forget. Mm-hmm. It's hard to go to you know, HR or whoever it is you need to go through a grievance process if you haven't been documenting. And that's a piece that is sometimes it's difficult, but it's really necessary. You know, every time you really have to be able to do that. And I think the other piece is you got to look at what's the cost benefit analysis on this, right? Do I want to stay in this organization and fight this fight, or can I leave? And for some people, you can't leave. And I totally get that. Sometimes you are stuck in a situation that is just completely unfair and unnavigable. And that's just where you are. But I think that we really have to look at, it's also part of the reason that when I talked about before, creating those trust networks, right, within your organization, because then when you talk to somebody about what's happening, they're not going to think you've made it up. They're going to be more likely to back you. There's going to be more likelihood of action being taken. And so that's why all of these things are important and they all work together. Because if you're out on a limb by yourself, yeah, that limb is going to break, you are going to fall, and you are going to be messed up.
Got it. Got it. Okay. Thank you for that answer. I'm going to go ahead and allow us to get a closer look at everyone now. Okay. So this is next question now. And this is going back to you, Ron. How is the city facilitating and encouraging conversation? You know, how are they really getting the conversation going about racial and gender inequality in the workplace? What's the city doing to spur that conversation?
I kind of want to go back to because it's all related, go back to what the previous question was as well, because it's all organization. It's all organizational, whether it's city or private sector, and there's a blending of the two. Right now, we have this unprecedented moment in history. It's not the first time, but we have it where we have somewhat of emotional solidarity, where everyone's listening to us. But what history has taught us is that, and it's already happening, is that the news cameras will go elsewhere. And then what else will happen is that other marginalized groups will want their time in the light. And so it's really important for us, while we have this moment where we have their ears and we have their attention, is to really push towards effectuating change at all levels. So some of these things, you're talking about HR, some of it's as simple as addressing microaggressions in the workplace. Okay, if now is the time where they want to know how you feel as an African American, address those issues, however big or small. If some of those issues are in regards to advancement within the organization, tell them, I would like to be at this level. Do you have any sort of executive mentoring programs? If so, we should have one. If we don't, now is that time before the message is diluted. It's happened before, and it will happen. We'll have other minority groups, sexual orientations, even gender. A lot of it will start to muddle what this thing really is, and then things just kind of go back to normal, and then in a few more years something else will happen and it comes back to the fore. So we have to almost be laser focused. I can say this because I've said this in public before. In regards to organizational, I think one of the main things that needs to be tackled is the issue of course, discrimination and racism, but especially with the Black man. If you deal with the Black man, everyone can ride that train. You will notice that sometimes within organizations, especially if you look at on LinkedIn with all the different new chief diversity officers coming up, a good percentage of them are women. Then lots of times they may have that position there, but whether or not they have that same person holding that position in the boardroom that can actually make real decisions, sometimes not. It's just there in stature where they can take stats on minority hires or things of that sort, but they don't really play a real role in regards to policy. If you deal with the things in regards to the Black male, then that will cover Black females, that will cover LGBTQIA+, that will cover just about anything, because everybody can ride that train if they fix that thing with the Black male. And again, microaggressions and things of that sort. So when we talk about what the city's doing, along with what we're saying with ED 27, the city is an organization like any other. Now, when I say also, like I said earlier today, the city, the main power, the main focus at the city, my main reason for being here is how can we effectuate what we look at the city, because the city does not have the profit motive in mind. The city has community, civility in mind. The processes are in place for the city to run smoothly and not have the ripples that we've had in the past. So how can we do that? How can we deal with the wealth gap? So these are the things that the city has to deal with, how to be a fully functioning city, continue to grow and deal with a more equitable environment. But again, the city is only a sliver. The rest of the city has to deal with, public sector is only a sliver. The rest of the city is private. So how can we do that? So we're very, especially with my team, the team that I run, we're very outward facing.
Okay.
If we as a city can project what we foresee as equitable circumstances, like the Evolve Entertainment Fund, trying to get more minorities in the entertainment industry. What I'm doing, I'm having all of the principles, the major principles in the real estate community, commercial corporate real estate, CBRE President Lou Horn, CIM President Shaul Kuba, all of these guys, I'm bringing them together. And I said from top to bottom, I want to know how we can bring more African Americans and more minorities into commercial real estate, short-term, long-term, and intermediate, with mentorships, with scholarships, with career path, with early education. And I want to do it with each sector. So when we talk about from the public sector, from the city, what the city can do is project our values of morals out to our private sector. Hopefully they will allow for these things to take place and find a way for the city to help them get to where we want to be.
Got it. Thank you for that, Ron. Let's take it to you, Brad. Again, this is probably new, but how is Abbott facilitating this conversation of, we can even take it to go off what Ron left with, specific to Black men, to being Black. How is it being brought up and encouraged to have a conversation about in Abbott? Uh-oh. Let's go ahead and make sure Brad's unmuted. Brad, can you unmute yourself? Okay, you should be able to. How about now, Brad? Are you unmuted? Something's wrong with Brad's end. Okay, we'll come back to that one. We can't hear you yet, Brad. We're gonna go ahead and continue. And if you can get in, go ahead and chime in. So I'll go straight to Stacy then. How do we have these difficult conversations in the workplace with our colleagues and with our superiors? How do we bring these conversations up, Stacy?
So I think I want to answer that question, but before I do, I kind of want to go back a minute to Ron,
okay.
Because something that he just said about bringing people together made me think, and I think it also relates a little bit to small business, right? Is I used to be affiliated with the National Association of African Americans in Human Resources, right? Some of you may know it as NAR. They prefer to be NAAA-HR. But at the end of the day, here in Los Angeles, we've had a very hard time keeping that chapter running. And overall, if you look at NAAA-HR and you look at other HR organizations that are predominantly white, and if I were to go to the largest and look at SHRM as an example, right? They have huge amounts of corporate support. They have people who are supporting the organization to the point where they can afford staff, right, who are going to run these organizations. So if we need to see, what is it that we need within businesses? As Ron said, he wants to bring together all of these people in corporate, real estate. My thought is, wow, well, I'm sure there are lots of HR people who could find those corporate real estate folks, right? Lots of recruiters, individuals who, if we were all together and we're utilizing an organization like NAAAHR to its fullest capacity, we could be a large body that would have some power. Mm-hmm. But the problem is we don't ever get the type of corporate support that is needed to have the kind of power that is needed to make the change that we need to have. And so I think that is something that hit me as you were talking, Ron. I was like, you know, that's what we need, because money translates to power. And if you look at the Black organizations, the Black counterparts, right, to the main organizations, one, why do they exist? They exist because we were excluded traditionally from the mainstream organization. So we went out and we created the National Association of Black Accountants, the National Association of Black Journalists, National Association of African Americans in Human Resources. I could go on for days, right? But how well funded are these organizations to actually be able to fulfill the mission and the vision that they set out to do? So I think that relates to about three of the questions that we've already talked about. Yeah. But as I'm sitting here, I'm kind of pulling that thread together and saying we need proper corporate support for those organizations to help to create a powerful coalition that can help to set the policies that we need, the practices that we need, and find the people that we need within corporate America and within public sectors.
Can I address Stacey really quickly, Sam?
Sure, go ahead.
I'm so glad you said that, Stacey. And I'm going to give you guys a little peek of behind the curtain. What I said about commercial real estate is the reason why I chose that sector is notoriously devoid of diversity, for one. And number two, it's one of the sectors that can create generational wealth. And I want to close the wealth gap. Okay. Now, there's a reason why the major players I'm bringing into this room aren't the very few handful of Black companies, because I know all of the major Black companies on this one, and I'm intentional about this. And I spoke with them, and they actually agree with me. I don't want to bring the thirsty in to tell us why you're thirsty. We know why you're thirsty. We're thirsty because you're not getting the corporate support, okay? We know that. So what I want to do, I'm bringing in the ones with the water. I want the ones with the water and tell them in an environment where they can be comfortable and tell them this is what needs to happen. You should partner with this. You should support that. You should support that and let them come together with that, all right, in a very comfortable environment, because we also have to let them see what's in it for them, okay? And then as that trust is built and as that vision is shared amongst the group, then I can start incorporating opportunities for them to effectuate what they said they would do. Okay, you say you would do this. Here's this party here. This is who you should support. You should become involved with this. You should become involved with that. And understand the human nature. At the end of the day, all of these, what's happening right now, nobody's doing anything illegal. It's nothing that any of these parties that are somewhat marginalized and not including African Americans, it's not that they are illegally not including African Americans. They just don't have to. There's no legal thing. Right. So you have to let them find what is their benefit. What's the benefit? Sometimes it's basically for the betterment of the civic life of Los Angeles, or sometimes it's you can let them see what's better for their bottom line. Sometimes you can let them see a lot of different things, but figuring out what those touch points are in an environment that's comfortable for them. So I am with you more than 100%.
I get that one, and I think that's a yes and. So I'm not going to turn this into a debate, but I think that's a yes. Mm-hmm. And what we're doing there is we're saying, okay, all of you Black corporate real estate individuals, it's not their problem to fix. White corporate America, the corporate real estate individuals, I'm saying they need to be putting some money and some resources into Black organizations.
That's what I just said.
So I think like,
yeah. Maybe I didn't say it, and maybe I didn't explain it articulately enough. I'm not the mayor; I just work for him. So,
I'll come talk to the mayor.
But you know what though?
I'm with you again. I'm with you.
I have a question to what Stacy brought up and what you just said, Ron. You said you bring the companies that actually have the water, and Stacy was referring to the companies that need the water. So are you saying that maybe the companies that Stacy noted should come to you, and then you will pair them to the companies that have the water?
No, I'm saying at the time we know where the buckets are.
Mm-hmm.
They've always come. It's like we know where the buckets are, where the empty buckets are. We have way more empty buckets than we have wells with the water that's willing to share the water. So to Stacy's point, we need to have the ones with the water. Let them know that's on them to fill these empty buckets and how it will benefit them. That's essentially what it is.
I see.
And so that's what and that goes across the board. And it's so complex. It's easy to conceptualize it to a certain extent, but when you get deeper and deeper, we start to look at racism. But another ism that's not really spoken about, that's just as palpable in certain sectors, is nepotism. Wherein they want their son or their daughter or their nephew or niece that they are pushing to it, instead of looking at another qualified applicant or looking at another potential business venture over here.
Sure.
So back to what I said about the RFPs.
Yeah, well, the RFP, that's an entirely different process. I feel you there. I feel you on the RFP to a certain extent. If it's an RFP that comes my way, it's on the up and up. I don't play that. So.
Okay. Thank you both. That was a great discussion. Brad, are you back with us yet?
Can you hear me? Testing.
Yes,
1,
there
2,
he is.
3.
All right.
All right.
So on their notes, let's just change just a little bit. At Abbott, how are they encouraging this type of conversation at all? Like, how amongst the employees, how are they doing it?
So I'm going to apologize because the technical difficulties, I had to change sources. So can you give me a little more background on your question?
Sure. So the initial question was, how is Abbott facilitating and encouraging conversations in the workplace about racial inequality?
Very gingerly. It's once again, as I said, alluded to earlier, there is that layer of making senior leaders uncomfortable, and as they become uncomfortable, then it permeates throughout the organization. So I actually have a call with my leadership team.
We're losing Brad. Ah, man. Okay, I really wanted to hear it. Okay, so
Hello?
We hear you.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you now.
Okay, you can hear me now?
Yeah.
Hello?
Try it again, and then if it cuts out, we'll keep it moving.
Can you hear me okay?
Yes, now
Hello?
we can. Yes.
All right. I apologize for the technical difficulty. Resident 10. I'll blame it on that. At any rate, I have hired a consultant basically to help me have the conversation with my team, because I will tell you, as an African-American leader, and my leadership team is mostly Caucasian. I have one diverse individual on the team, but for the region, and coming from all parts of the United States, obviously, there's a push that I'm conscious of as well, to ensure that I'm giving them the appropriate information to be able to handle conversations with their teams. But at the same time, there's also an unconscious bias that they have within themselves as well, that we need to bring out and make sure that they're able to deal with, without, at least in my opinion, making someone feel guilty. I'm not trying to make them feel guilty about the bias. I'm not trying to make them feel like they're bad people. But I do think it's important that they recognize and understand that the need to not only encourage and bring diverse individuals into the organization, but for those folks that are here currently, we need to address the concerns of those folks as well. There was a time shortly after George Floyd's murder when I think we were all hurting. I know I was hurting. I mean, that Monday to try and go back to work, I just wasn't there. It wasn't there for me. I wasn't in it. And I think it was a missed opportunity from a leadership perspective for us to actually reach out to our team and our people, and have conversations around this individual in organization, in an industry where there aren't a lot of people that look like you. And I think that was a unique opportunity for our leaders to stand out and really show employees that they care and they want to learn, they want to understand. So although that was a missed opportunity, what we're trying to do is recapture that and bring that back. And in doing so, we're going to, as I said before, have to break some eggs. People are going to have to, learn how to have those conversations, learn how to be in that uncomfortable space and emerge from it. And I think it will develop them into better leaders, and it will also develop our teams as well.
Excellent. I think we were able to get the end of that too. Okay, that was good. Thank you, Brad, for that. Thank you, Brad, for that. Thank you, Ron and Stacy and Cheryl. Now I want to take it to question and answers. Some people have some questions in the chat. So I want to allow Kelly Kemp to jump in and give us some of those questions. And then if they're directed to someone specifically, please speak up and answer. And if not, then I'll direct it to one of you guys.
Okay, so the first question was from Jen, and this question is for Stacy. Do you have guidelines for a larger corporation as far as a goal? She was part of a brand new, as a response to the most recent protests, Inclusion Champion Network, but she fears that due to the size of her company, it will not make a dent because they have not outlined tangible goals.
Yes, and I think that's kind of one of the first things that I said in the very beginning is I always ask, what's the goal, right? And so when you're a larger company, the goal does need to be maybe a little broader, and then it's on the team. So depending upon how many layers you have, you've got to cascade those goals down so that they are achievable and sustainable. So if your goal is, let's say, to ensure that we have an inclusive workplace, okay, that's a great sort of top level goal. But then you have to define, what does an inclusive workplace mean? And an inclusive workplace may mean different things to different departments, depending upon geography, depending upon function, depending upon what it is that you're doing, right? So that's where it is up to the leaders of those divisions to then define that goal for their department, and then as you keep cascading it down, making them more and more quantifiable and achievable, so that people know what it is that they're doing. And then at the end of that, you're able to look at that and measure it and say, okay, we did this, and this now adds to this department's goal and this department's goal. And so as an organization, yes, we are moving to an inclusive workplace. But as a department, what that looks like is going to be different here than it does for our department in Texas.
Thank you. Thank you for that.
Okay, our next question is from Andre, and this question is for Brad. With the heightened awareness, visibility around social inequalities, many of us in the private sector are now tasked with being the voice for the Black community to help drive diversity initiatives and organizational change. Do you have any guidance or advice that you can offer on how to approach this opportunity as we seek to make meaningful change?
Yeah, can you hear me, Kelly? Everybody hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
All right. I'm back and forth between technology. I think we kind of addressed this a little bit earlier, and Andre and I had a sidebar conversation. But just from my standpoint, it starts with performance. In a sales organization, although I'm not saying everything is ever going to be equal and fair and just, you have to perform to have a voice. You have to come from a position of, I've shown you what diversity can do. I'm a diverse candidate, and as we do that, then it allows you the opportunity and the voice to be able to address certain things that you see that could actually potentially increase the overall success of the organization. At the end of the day, companies want to make money. And if they see the opportunity and they see the value in diversity, I think there's an opportunity for us to push that through performance. And I'm not, once again, saying that everything's ever going to be fair. I'm not saying that maybe sometimes that your performance is not recognized the same way of some of your peers, but it still starts with, what you do on a daily basis to impact the overall organization.
Thank you.
We had a question from Carrie, but Brad did answer it. But I will go ahead and read it. In terms of accountability and to those organizations that are now moving in a direction of diversity and inclusion, what can we do to make sure they stay the course? And these recent changes isn't just a byproduct of these companies, organizations getting religion about race relations and equity concerns.
Yeah.
She didn't direct that towards anyone in specific, but I think Brad answered it.
Okay. Do you want me to?
If you have an answer, Brad, you can answer again.
Okay. All right. I think it's, once again, it's an opportunity, because as leadership puts themselves kind of out there, it's our responsibility as employees to hold them accountable to the words that and the messaging that they provide. And I don't think it's inappropriate at all to follow up with leaders around the words and the messaging that they kind of put out there. I know that if, for example, and I'll just go back once again to our own organization, as our CEO has put out several different edicts around, diversity and around what he wants to see happen. He did take the step of actually having a call with all of the diverse individuals within the organization, a Zoom call, and he made some very, very telling, very direct statements around what he wants to see happen. So in that, once that's out there, and it's definitely things that we can hold him accountable to. And in my opinion, as you once again, as you have accountability things, you have to inspect. I want to see scorecards. I want to see, what's next. I want to know how we're going to be measured to those goals. And I guess from my standpoint, it's something that's a right. It's something that as an individual, an employee, and a member of an organization, it's something that you can hold people accountable to. We're all held accountable to other things, within our daily jobs. I think that as they put those things out there, it's our right to hold them accountable to things as well.
Can I piggyback on what Brad is saying quickly?
Yes.
I agree with him, and I also have another little slant on it. What I would like to see, obviously he's within a sales organization, and sales numbers and quotas and things like that, those things rule the day within that specific discipline in sales. What I want to see is throughout that an average to mediocre Black guy has the same opportunities as an average to mediocre white guy. Wherein, in order for us to get to a certain level, we don't have to be a LeBron James or Michael Jordan to hold the same level that an average to mediocre white guy has. You understand what I'm saying? Because that's what tends to happen. So I use myself as an example. When I was the vice president of vocation incentives for CBRE, it's a global practice within CBRE that does corporate site selection. I was the only executive in that entire group, period. The only black one. And they would look at me like I was special. No, I'm not special. I was just exposed. Not special. I had opportunities, and I was exposed to opportunities that if other kids on Saginaw and Flint, Michigan were exposed to the same things I was exposed to, then they could have made it as well. So that's when I think that we've really gotten somewhere. Wherein, in order for us, obviously, if we're going to excel, we're going to excel. But I don't want for all of us to have to be LeBron James. Like I think Chris Rock said it in one of his specials, how he's super successful, but there's a dentist that lives next door to him. So although he's made it to the pinnacle of entertainment, a white dentist is successful enough to be his neighbor. You understand what I'm saying? So that's when I know we've made true strides up and down the chain. Now, it may be a little different for sales organizations and things of that sort, but that's when I look at racial equity and parity. It's wherein we don't have to be a unicorn in order to have the same sort of opportunities for advances. If we are a unicorn, we're going to go that much further. But that shouldn't be the hurdle that we have to jump in order to have the same sort of opportunities for advancement as others.
Right. And I would add to that and say, you know, the accountability piece also goes to the question about goals. Because when you put the goals down on paper, people have something to hold you accountable to. So one of those goals might be, we're going to make sure that we are not only looking at 5 Ivy League schools in our recruitment process, right? That can be a goal. It's we're going to open it up and we're going to look at maybe 100 universities instead of 5. So that's something you can check, right? You can actually look and see, well, where did resumes come from? Which people did we interview? Those are things you're able to go back and look at, right? And then you can say to a recruiting manager, well, we said we were going to do this, but I don't see any evidence that that's been done. Why not, right? So you have to write the goal down, you have to articulate the goal, and then you actually have to work to that goal.
Yeah, and Ron, I agree with you. And I know this is not what you were saying, but I also look at it from the standpoint, I don't want the mediocre white guy either, right? I want exceptional talent overall. And I think we have the ability and we have exceptional talent. As this is an NSN event, I will kind of relate it to NSN specifically. I've been going to NSN now recruiting with multiple organizations over the last 10 years. And I can count literally on one hand how many people we've actually hired from NSN. So I guess in kind of piggybacking on what you were saying, my goal would be that the barriers of entry are even and equitable. Because to your point, someone may or may not be mediocre from a Caucasian standpoint, but back to your earlier point around nepotism, they know somebody, or they're this person's neighbor, or they have this connection, what have you. And when you look at the resume is not equivalent, but because they know someone, they have that opportunity. So as we begin to kind of say, okay, I'm not lowering the bar, but I want the bar to be equal across the board. Exactly. So we're saying the same things, but
yes, we are. Thank you, bro.
Kelly, do we have any more questions?
Yes, we have one more question from Nikita. What is being done about performance reviews that are not individually defined from a metric standpoint? Has a wide range of where an individual can stand that may not be recognized as fair? And she did not direct this question. Any of the panelists, please.
Yeah, anyone can chime in.
I'm not sure I understand the question.
I will read it again.
Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Oh, okay. So what I was saying, and the question is that I've seen this in my past work history to where an individual, say like a group of managers, are evaluated, say, biannually, and so they're measured based on if, say, a certain department, if they perform well. So you'll have one manager that may say they get a 10% increase in their performance for a raise because they feel like that manager that's overseeing the middle managers feel like, hey, I like this one based on, her personality. And then you have another individual who's working just as hard, but then gets a performance rating of, say, a 3% increase for their review. So my question is, how can you address this with your manager in regards to it not being defined from an individual standpoint when performance reviews come up as being fair or unfair when you're getting your review and you're sitting with your manager when he says, hey, you guys are all are in the same department. Right. But then you find out your coworker is getting, hey, 10% more than what you're getting. So
right, it goes back to metrics and having a transparent process that everyone knows what it is. So if that process, again, it's so important for the policies and procedures that they are written, but then it's also important that they are adhered to. If you have a policy that says, if I hit X goal, I will get an increase of X%, I hit the goal, I get the increase, period. Right? Like where's the difference, right? Now, if you get detracted, now you get to say, well, why didn't I hit the goal? What happened? Now it's up to the manager to say, well, you also didn't do this thing or that thing. Okay, that's fine. But where in the policy does it say I have to do those other things in order to get this raise, right? So that's why it is so important that you know, we like to, as employees, you want to shy away from performance reviews. You don't like to do them. Everyone hates them. Oh, this sucks. No, you want your performance review, and I want to know what's going to be in it, and I want to make sure I understand what the policies are and what the metrics are, because I'm going to hold you to it so I get my raise.
Mhm.
Right. I could not agree more, Stacey. It's about managing your career. I mean, you have the ability to have impact on how you're rated, and you need to sit down with your direct reports. I mean, some say semi-annually. I encourage every quarter. You should sit down and you should have a plan, and you should see how you're progressing towards that plan. There should never, ever, ever be a surprise at a performance review. You should have had the conversations around what your metrics are so that you know, to Stacey's point, I have achieved ABC. These are the metrics we put around that, and this is the direction we should be going in. And I just, that's something that I will speak for myself. I was never taught. I didn't know how to do. I had a mentor, you know, within my particular chain of command that actually sat me down and taught me that, because I was very bitter at why do I have to do, you know, Nikita, to your point, why do I have to do ABC? Why do I have to move mountains and lift weights? And this other person just has to walk across the street and they get a raise and I don't. Well, that person taught me you have to manage your own career. And since that time, I've encouraged that from my people. I do that with my senior leadership. It's very, very important that you take control of your own career.
Excellent. Thank you for that, Brad.
Thank you.
Thank you, Brad. One more question someone sent to me privately that I think they meant to send to the group. I am an independent coach and trainer. I'm curious about how the people who work for companies feel their companies are receptive to hire outside partners to provide training. If so, who's making decisions? Is it HR or different department leaders? And I guess that's directed to Brad.
So it depends. It truly does. So, for example, within my organization, I have operational metrics. I have a controller. I have a budget that I can spend on certain things. And in the event of you know, something that's necessary, we could potentially expand out. That said, any outside contractor that we utilize has to be vetted through the corporate structure and be approved, an approved and licensed, basically, vendor to the organization. So once that person or that organization is approved, then I have the ability to hire them based on, you know, basically they would work with my area controller, and the area controller would work out the financials and all that to make sure that it's appropriate under our operational spend.
Got it.
You know, I can add on to that. So I used to own a company called Ad Hoc Staffing Solutions, and we were a qualified vendor for NBC Universal. And typically, and I speak about the public sector as well, but typically it's the hiring manager more so than HR. And the hiring manager comes through with what the need is. The hiring manager gives the criteria by what they're looking for. Lots of times they try to look for it in-house first, obviously, because it's less expensive. And if they can't find it in-house, then they usually have a pre-approved list of consultants that they've worked with in the past. And then they put out the scope of work and things of that sort. And then that's the way it goes out. The similarities to that when it comes to the public sector in regards to outside help, there are some similarities. Similarities are that when you're dealing with the public sector, you know, again, I don't know if you guys have read the news, but a few months ago, I had to get an outside auditor to audit DCR, the Department of Cannabis Regulation. I'm the one that did that. So I know that I needed an outside third-party auditor to do that, and that's not something we were going to do in-house because we needed to have hands-off. So the process was the same. We have a group of auditors that have capacity that we've worked with in the past, a bunch of them that have the trust of legitimacy in city government. And so we put out the bid. So the thing to do, I would say, is to respond, but also figure out if there's a preferred vendor list and see if you can get on that. And when it's a preferred vendor list, that means that it's probably pre-approved of some sort. They've vetted you. They make sure that you have all of your certifications and certificates. They know your capacity to a certain extent. They would do that rather than try to, because lots of times if you get to the point where you're hiring an outside vendor, that means time is of the essence. You don't have either the capacity, bandwidth within the organization or the time to complete that task yourself internally. So you dole it out to someone else so they can do it in the expeditious fashion. So they're going to do is that vetting process needs to have taken place. So what I would say for anyone out there who's looking for contracting opportunities is to first find out how you can get onto a pre-approved list, get all the certifications needed to be on that list, and that way your likelihood of being chosen goes up exponentially.
Excellent. Thank you for that, Ron. That was very important to understand. So we're past time actually, and we're going to bring everything to a close, and I'm going to pass the microphone to Nikita. But before we do that, real quick from all of you, how can we keep up with all of you to get the most up-to-date information about some of these changes that we've discussed and what's happening regarding these issues? And we'll start with you, Ron, and just let us know how we can keep up with you and these changes, and we'll just go through everyone, and then we'll pass it to Nikita.
One place I don't want to be is the LA Times. Okay, so other than LA Times, and to keep up with me, I do well, not as much, but a lot of speaking engagements, a lot of other things through LinkedIn, perhaps. It's a very busy time, extremely busy and stressful time. So I would say through LinkedIn probably is the best way to keep up with me, other than some interviews I do from time to time for publications and things of that sort.
Excellent. Brad?
Sorry about that. I would say the same thing. Right now, obviously, with the unprecedented times of COVID and everything that's going on, it's crazy how much we are being called into different meetings, forecasts, all that kind of stuff. And I will say in advance that although I try and keep up with communication and get back to people as quickly as I possibly can, it's just the hours in the day. So LinkedIn is a nice place to house information and house messaging and be able to communicate at will. So I am open on LinkedIn. You can look me up and we can connect that way.
Excellent. And then Cheryl and then Stacy.
For me, I'm reachable as well on LinkedIn, and you can also visit my website, which is sgtcheryldorsey.com, and contact me there.
And then Stacy.
So I just put my information in the chat. Yes, LinkedIn is the place because I do actually respond. Well, actually, my assistant responds to every message that comes in. So if you do send me a connection request, you will get a response that will initially not come from me. But I do accept just about everybody. And my website is also there, which is reworkwork.com. So easy way to find me. And I do a LinkedIn Live Wednesdays at 8 a.m. for at least the next few weeks. So if you want to join me on a LinkedIn Live, you can catch me at 8 a.m. Pacific.
Excellent. Thank you all again for this wonderful discussion we had tonight. We got so much information. Ron, it was great to hear from you. We sincerely appreciate it. Brad, thank you so much for being so transparent with us and giving us so much information. And Stacy and Cheryl, thank you so much for everything you added to the conversation. It was very informative. We had a wonderful discussion, and thank you again. I'll go ahead and pass it to Nikita to close us out.
Yes, I just wanted to say I wanted everybody to know how grateful I am that you were able to get on the Zoom call. I understand that everyone is quite busy, and I just want to thank not only the guests, the members, the leadership. I want to thank especially the panelists, and also for Samuel doing such an excellent job in asking these important questions. And I just want to say thank you to everyone that has spoken today and all those who have asked questions. And I just want to let the panelists know that NSNLA will also be sending you a gift in response to you being able to speak on this very important topic in today's conditions. And so you'll be getting something soon from NSNLA. And if anyone else has anything else they want to say, you guys are free to say if you have any additional comments or anything, you can put it in the chat. And then if something wasn't answered, what we'll do is from NSNLA, we will send a follow-up email with answers to your questions if they weren't addressed tonight. So again, I just want to thank everybody. And if anyone has anything else to say, you can say it now. And then if not, then we can close this out.
I'll just say thank you to NSN. Yeah, I appreciate it. And
well, I'm sorry. Thank you.
That's okay.
And I cannot accept gifts. Okay, so please don't say me wrong, but thank you so much. And Samuel, great job. Thank you. And thanks to all the fellow panelists. I was impressed by each and every one of you. Thank you guys so much. I really appreciate it.
Yes, thank you. And I just want to say, I appreciate the gift, but if it's something that you can maybe donate to an organization, then I'd be happy to do that. But again, thank you for, I participated in NSN for many, many years back when I was doing sales at Prudential. And so it's been a while.
Oh, okay. Well, we appreciate you coming back and remembering NSN as a nonprofit organization, and we appreciate everything that you've done in the past for NSNLA and you remembering the good times with us. Thank you.
And I just want to echo Stacy and Ron's comments. Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate the opportunity. Appreciate hearing from the panelists as well. I learned a lot as well. Obviously, once again, not being from LA, but hopefully sharing some insight with you guys. I appreciate it. And once again, like Stacy and Ron said, gifts are not necessary. I appreciate that, but if it could be put to better use for someone else, I would definitely suggest donating it that way. So thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Okay, no problem. And then I just wanted to make sure everyone was aware the reason why Mayor Butts wasn't able to attend this call. He had a pressing issue, as you guys are aware. California, we're in the red state now for this COVID-19. And out in the Los Angeles County, there's a lot of pressing issues happening. So he wanted to give his apologies that he wasn't able to speak tonight, as well as Johnson & Johnson speakers. They're working on a vaccine right now, and they were unable to speak as well. We're hoping they will speak at our next event in the future. And so I just wanted to make sure everyone was aware that it was something that that was unforeseen for today event. So I just want to say thank you again to everybody, and have a good night.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.